Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, August 11th, 2021. Today is Tuesday, August 10th, 2021, and I apologize for the lateness of posting this, but it's been that kind of weekend. Been very busy all weekend. It's been a very busy month this past month, and it's all beginning to catch up with me, and it just didn't happen this weekend. Today we are in Judges chapter 3, and we're going to start in verse 1, and we'll see where we get to. These are the nations the Lord left to test all those Israelites who had not experienced any of the wars in Canaan. He did this only to teach warfare to the descendants of the Israelites who had not had previous battle experience. The 5 rulers of the Philistines, all the Canaanites, the Sidonites, and the Hivites living in the Lebanon mountains from Mount Baal Hermon to Lebo Hamath. They were left to test the Israelites to see whether they would obey the Lord's commands, which he had given their forefathers through Moses. The Israelites lived among the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. They took their daughters in marriage and gave their own daughters to their sons and served their gods. Now, the list in Judges is different than the list in Joshua. Between the two, there is a little bit of them clearing the land. They're continuing to do that. It's not that they are giving up and abandoning the task. It actually lists fewer leftovers in the land. So they're continuing to make progress. It's just at the point this gets started, they have compromised in some places, and they've ended some of these groups as organized groups. They're no longer in political control, but they're living among them. And it's not, they're not being obedient to God to wipe them all out, unfortunately. And verse 5, not only were they living among them, but in verse 6, they were giving their daughters to the locals in marriage and marrying their sons to the daughters of the locals, and worshiping their gods. The very thing that God warned them that if they did not wipe everybody out, if they lived among them, if they compromised, they would be doing. And here they are doing it. And they've therefore abandoned God. Not a good situation for them. They're continuing to conquer the land, yes. They're continuing to increase in number and fill the land and subdue it, which is part of what they understood they were to do. But they're doing it by compromising intermarriage and worshiping the gods of the people they were supposed to displace and destroy all their gods and all that. They also had completely intact people groups around them that were strong politically. Now, before they invaded the land, there's no evidence the Philistines got organized but what the Philistines were warring with themselves more than they were warring with anybody else, or as much with themselves as with everybody else. After they entered the land, the Philistines get organized, and they said, we got more in common than we do to keep us apart. So let's make an alliance, and the 5 cities became a nation instead of 5 city-states. And they had 5 separate rulers. We don't know fully how they managed that, but they figured out some sort of system because they saw somebody that would wipe them out if they didn't get organized. And so they organized together to maintain their unity and maintain a united front against the Israelites. And so they managed to maintain their territory. If you read Joshua carefully, some of their cities had been conquered in the initial campaign. And by this point in time, that they have it back and they have control of it, and all the way through until King David conquers them, they managed to maintain their territory. Israelites never took their territory from them until King David. They were always a thorn in the side, and they were a strong kingdom to the south. It lists all the Canaanites. The Canaanites basically lived on the plain, and the plains of the Jordan, the plains of the middle of Israel, and they had chariots. So they maintained their territory and their government. The Sidonites were on the north against the Mediterranean Sea, and they were around Sidon, just in case you need to figure that out. The Hivites in the Lebanon Mountains, that's to the north central, and so they have enemies to the north, to the west, the southwest, and in the central part of their country. And then these other groups they mention, Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, roughly from northeast to southwest, had been their territories, but they were living in that area, and instead of totally removing them, they were compromising with them. The Jebusites are the only ones out of those groups that were among the Israelites that seemed to have any kind of political self-governance. All the others had lost any kind of government, and even though the Israelites didn't have a centralized government and didn't have in turn any kind of strong central government, they had tribal governments. They had effectively ended political control, but they didn't wipe everybody out. And so the culture was still there, even though the political state was not for these people. And they were probably hurting pretty bad, and intermarriage with the Israelites was the only way they were going to survive at all. And they figured that out probably. And you don't go kill your sons-in-law, you know. So if we marry our daughters off and we marry their daughters, then, you know, they won't attack us. You know, their culture is probably hurting pretty bad. May have lost the priestly class too, and things like that, and comes down to family shrines and stuff like that, which would have seriously disrupted the seriousness of the religion. But people still believed in it, still practiced it, and you know that when they intermarried with the Israelites, they took their religious practice and religious beliefs with them, and so the Israelites are beginning to worship the gods that were in the land. Verse 7. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals, what we call Baals, but Baal is the actual pronunciation in Hebrew, and the Ashereths. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, so they sold them into the hands of Cushan Rishathaim, king of Aram Naharaim, to whom the Israelites were subject for 8 years. But when they cried out to the Lord, he raised up for them a deliverer, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, who saved them. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him so that he became Israel's judge and went to war. The Lord gave Cushan Rishathaim, king of Aram, into the hands of Othniel, who overpowered him. So the land had peace for 40 years until Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. Now, the kingdom that they're talking about is partially in the country that we would call Jordan today, and partially in Iraq. They basically spanned north of Israel, but from basically Lake Galilee to the Euphrates River. Depends upon exactly when in history we're talking exactly how big their country was. It expanded and shrank and moved around. They were somewhat a nomadic people. They did build some cities, but they were not great city builders. A lot of their people lived in tents and consequently moved around. And they very often, when they formed an army and attacked, they brought everybody with them, and all their they might have left shepherds out in the field with the flocks, but they would have essentially their whole nation with all of its resources present. The supply lines would have been rather short. Consequently, if they got defeated, they pretty easily picked up tents and moved out and left the territory to the victors. It was hard to defeat them completely. On the other hand, it was also pretty hard to, pretty easy to run them out of a piece of land if you were determined to take it, but hard to keep because they could easily come back next spring. They're north of Israel. Othniel is from the south, and so they apparently were conquered pretty deeply south. The Amorites, which, by the way, same group of people that Jacob's in-laws were from. So this is a group of people that should have stopped at Mizpah and not crossed across to attack Israel's, Jacob's descendants. They did. I think that's God's hand. He was punishing them with relatives. So they got fairly far south, got into Judah's territory for Nathaniel, excuse me, to be the leader, to conquer them back. And that means the northern tribes were in serious trouble. Judah was probably less affected, and therefore he could get a group together that would effectively defeat them. They may have spent their strength, though, conquering the northern areas and even conquering the Canaanites, so helping Israel to clean out some of the people they should have been cleaning out. This time it only took them 8 years to realize their error. When that happened, Othniel was the one that killed this king on the battlefield. Whoever his successor was would have been, well, okay, we're going to withdraw. We've overextended ourselves. Unless we want to live here. There may have been people encroaching on their territory back home, and we're overextended. We're either got to conquer this and abandon the old area, or go back home and defend it. And so Othniel effectively ended their advance and ended the empire building of this people group. And they stayed away for 40 years. Verse 12. Once again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and because they did this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, the king of Moab, power over Israel, getting the Ammonites and Amalekites to join him. Eglon came and attacked Israel, and they took possession of the city of palms. The Israelites were subject to Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years. Now, Moab was to the east, and at the south end of the eastern part of their country. And Jericho, the city of palms, was the natural gateway between their country and Israel. Defeating them and taking control of Jericho meant that he was basically taking the citadel that guarded the ford of the Jordan and taking control of that end of the trade route that went through there. Jericho was the traditional place that gathered the tolls from using that road. And Moab was the other, on the middle of the other end of the road. Israel was had the terminus up, eventually at Jerusalem, but unsure if at this point in time the Jebusites were in Jerusalem were the terminus of this road, or if it just kind of splintered out and just went into the land of Israel. The thing is, Israel was the breadbasket. Moab had to buy most of their food from Israel. They, in turn, sold food further east to what today would be the Arab states around the Persian Gulf, from Qatar all the way south through the EAU to even the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia and Somalia and the countries down there. So they did trade with a great deal of people. Some of those people, in turn, crossed the Persian Gulf and traded with Persia and with India and with people that traded with them. Though India, in turn, traded with Southeast Asia and China. And so the Moabites did not get much trade goods all the way from China, but archaeology has found small amounts of things that originated in China, things like jade and silk, that clearly came from China. It came a long and tortuous route and had passed through a bunch of hands to get there. It was very rare there. But on the western end, the trade was food, particularly wheat and dates and figs and barley and pomegranates, things that Israel basically had a monopoly on. Other places grew wheat, but Israel was the birthplace of wheat, and so consequently they grew better wheat than most places and grew it more abundantly. Jordan, the fords of the Jordan were protected by Jericho. Jericho was the city that, if you controlled it, you controlled the fords of the Jordan, and you could therefore tax the trade route. Otherwise, you were one of the traders that paid taxes. And so Moab capturing Jericho, big blow to the Israelites. But for them, since they had a centralized government, the government now had a source of revenue. It wasn't just taxing as you came into Moab from the east or from the west, but you could control the whole trade route, the western end of the trade route, and tax the whole thing, and tax it more efficiently. You didn't have to tax it as you came into your country. You could let people trade, and you could get, therefore, lower priced goods in Moab. You could tax it when it, when it went into Israel or when it came out of Israel, and not have to tax it again until, if you controlled Jericho, you didn't have to tax it again, even if it left the country on the other side. So you could also, while gaining greater tax revenue for the central government, sell cheaper goods further east, and didn't have to tax the goods as they came into your country, but as they left the country, and that made goods cheaper in Moab and more profitable and more revenue for the government, both. So plum for the Moab. Big loss for the Israelites. This is also the southern end of Israel. So there's no indication that they conquered anything of the rest of the country, but they got this politically and strategic city of Jericho. That's the big thing. And he ruled it for 18 years. 15. Again, the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he gave them a deliverer, Ehud, a left-handed man, the son of Gera the Benjamite. The Israelites sent him with tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Now, Ehud had made a double-edged sword about 1.5 feet long, which he strapped to his right thigh under his clothing. He presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab, who was a very fat man. After Ehud had presented the tribute, he sent on their way the men who had carried it. At the idols near Gilgal, he himself turned back and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. The king said, Quiet. And all his attendants left him. We'll pick back up at 19 here in a minute, but let's talk about what's going on here. Eglon not only has control of the trade route, he's taxing the people. He's not taxing them with his people in the country, but he's requiring a tribute once a year. Basically, he's going to tax the country. Well, there's no country to tax, so, the Israelites have to cooperate together to get it, the tax together, the tribute together, and send it. The thing is, if they don't, if part of the country sends it and part doesn't, they know Eglon is going to come with his army to the part that didn't send it. So there's some incentive for everybody to contribute, at least on paper. But unequal contribution is probably assured. And so this Ehud, he's from Benjamin, south central and eastern part of the country. He comes up with this plan, and he's going to carry it out and see if he can't pull it off. He's a bold man. He's left-handed. Left-handed fighters had certain advantages and certain disadvantages in war. Most people were used to right-handed fighters, and so they would attack in strange ways. They could, hide things where people wouldn't be looking. And having his sword on his right thigh, inside of his right thigh, was the weird thing. They were expecting a right-handed man. You either have it on the outside of your right thigh or the inside of your left thigh. And having a weapon hidden inside, particularly a large weapon like a foot and a half, 18-inch cubit, literally, the length of your forearm, um, did affect your gait, but because you didn't want to stab yourself, basically. The scabbard, if you had one on there to protect yourself, would also affect things. But it caused your movement to be a little odd. If they thought his movement was a little odd, they would have checked, pat him down on the left side, and no, we don't find anything. Okay, we just maybe have a battle injury or something. And anyway, so Ehud leads this group. They give the tribute like they're supposed to, and then they leave and go back. Now the thing is, they get to Gilgal, where the idols are. Now Gilgal is where the Israelites camped when they crossed the Jordan for the first time. So it's now become a pagan religious site. How poorly they had kept up with their history. But apparently, Eglon's men were with them, and even Eglon himself were escorting them back. So when they got there, Ehud sent the carriers back on and basically split up the party and said, everybody go home. And said, I have a message for the king. And so then he comes back to the king of Moab. I doubt Eglon went all the way to Gilgal. So he had to go back all the way to the capital of Moab on the other side of the Jordan. Several days' journey, probably. Or maybe if he was in really good shape, he could make it in one day, or one really long day of hiking. Anyway, verse 19. At the idols near Gilgal, he himself turned back and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. The king said, quiet, and all his attendants left him. Then Ehud then approached him while he was sitting alone in the upper room in his summer palace and said, I have a message from God for you. As the king rose from his seat, Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh, and plunged it into the king's belly. Now, in the summer palace, Moab gets hot in the summer. Yeah, it's in the highlands east of the Jordan, but during the summer, the wind is coming off the desert. It's hot to start with. Even if it goes up, it's not all that much uplift because it's highlands on the other side. It's not going to cool that much. It's going to be dry. The sun's going to beat down. It's going to be very hot. And so once Eglon got prosperous enough, he built a palace down in the part that stayed moist enough that it stayed cool, and therefore it stayed moister and stayed cooler during the summer. So he's got a summer palace down apparently near Gilgal, and or at least in the Jordan Valley. And Ehud then comes in and talks to him. Well, the king sends his attendants out so that Ehud can talk to him in private. And, he says he has a secret message for the king. Well, this message is 18 inches long and sharp on both sides. That's what Ehud is going to tell him. And so he reaches in, surprise attack, pulls the sword out with his left hand, which wasn't expected, harder to defend against if you weren't expecting it, pulls the sword out from his right thigh and stabs him in the belly. verse 22. Even the handle sunk in after the blade, which came out its back. Ehud did not pull the sword out, and the fat closed in over it. Then Ehud went out to the porch, and he shut the doors of the upper room behind him and locked them. So Ehud, he's trying to be crafty. He's trying to get away without attracting a lot of attention. He's got the king alone. He's assassinated him. Stabbing in the belly, you bleed out. If he knew where to hit, he could hit the major artery that comes down the center of the thoracic cavity, and it's basically instantly unconscious because you lose blood pressure if it gets severed. And if he struck right, the king could be basically instantly unconscious. And the blade came out his back, but the handle was hidden by the rolls of fat on his stomach. So, it might have taken him a few minutes to bleed out, and in modern times, a good ambulance crew could probably save you from that kind of cut. A good medic in the battlefield does. Modern warfare has taught our medics a lot of good medicine, but that day and time, particularly if Ehud, locks and closes the door and sneaks away and doesn't tell anybody what he's done, Eglon is dead by the time anybody even gets to worrying about him. It's over. Once the sword goes in, he's unconscious. He's not, and Ehud didn't want his sword back. A bloody sword in his hand, blood on his clothes, that kind of thing would tip people off. He intentionally made that sword for one purpose, and he did it, and then he locks the palace up, and he leaves. 24. After he had gone, the servants came and found the doors of the upper room locked. They said, "He must be relieving himself in the inner room of the house." They waited the point of embarrassment, but when he did not open the door of the room, they took a key and unlocked them. There they saw their lord fall onto the floor dead. Well, okay. If he's using the bathroom, might be, it's a big job, 5-10 minutes. So, are you going to embarrass your king? Calling him out from the potty? No, you're going to let him use the restroom. Well, they know it's plenty long and he hadn't showed back up yet. They probably called and he didn't answer, and, they began to go, something's funny here, and we're embarrassed that we're going to break in on his bathroom, but something's not right. Well, you got to go find the key. Got to go get the key. Got to go get the guy that has the key, that has the authorization to open the king's chamber up. This is the king's chamber. You don't just barge in casually. There's some, there's some politics to go through. Hey, it's been a long time, and he hadn't answered us, and the guy with the key would be like, "Yeah, I'm concerned too. Let's check on him. I'll be in trouble if I unlock the door, but if he's in trouble, I'll be in trouble if I don't unlock the door." So, and they unlock the door, and there he is dead. They've waited too long. He's bled out. Ehud has gotten away. Verse 26. While they waited, Ehud got away. He passed by the idols and escaped to Sierra. When he arrived there, he blew a trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went down with him from the hills, with him leading them. So he doesn't go back to Benjamin, where he's from. He goes north to Ephraim, which was north of Gilgal, and he blows the trumpet there, and he gets allies from a different tribe to follow him. Verse 20, "Follow me," he ordered. For the Lord has given Moab your enemy into your hands. So they followed him down and took possession of the fords of the Jordan that led to Moab. They allowed no one to cross over. So they didn't try to take the city of Jericho. They took the fords and tried to control the trade route and didn't let anybody cross. Strategic point. At that time, they struck down about 10,000 Moabites, all vigorous and strong. Not a man escaped. That day, Moab was made subject to Israel, and the land had peace for 80 years. So, Moab did not invade them for 80 years. Now, notice the tribes that are mentioned here. Jericho is in Judah, Benjamin, and Ephraim. That's the three that are on the east side of the country that are up against Moab. They're probably the only ones that were actually politically affected by Moab conquering Jericho. The other tribes were probably not subject to Eglon. This is good evidence that this was not this was only a regional conquering. But if you control the trade routes, it affects the economy of the whole land. So Moab was getting wealthy on the Israelites by taxing their produce as they sold it on the trade route. Israelites weren't getting the profit. Moab was. So everybody was hurt, even if they weren't politically affected. By controlling the fords of the Jordan, they controlled the choke point, and when people tried to go back home to Moab, they killed them, and consequently depopulated the Moabites that were in Israel, the people that were then the garrisons and the taxing authorities and the trade officials and things like that. So they probably were near the summer palace, and when they realized their king was dead, they were trying to flee back home, and they were not organized. He didn't have a general that could be the second in command and organize things, because if they had, just controlling the fords of the Jordan wouldn't have been effective. But they tried to flee, and he cut down all the refugees. Still a very effective strategy, because probably the leaders of the country were the ones vacationing in summer in the cool parts. If you weren't that kind of wealthy that you could afford to move your whole households twice a year, then you would probably stay home. So the common Moabite was still back home. The elite were the ones in the summer palace area. And so consequently killing the king and then controlling the fords and wiping out the elite set Moab back seriously. And for 80 years they didn't bother the Israelites. Verse 31. After Ehud came Shamgar, son of Aneth, who struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad. He too saved Israel. Now Shamgar was after Ehud, but he's on the western side of Judah, near the Philistines. He struck down 600 men with an ox goad. As we'll learn in Samuel, the Israelites did not have good weapons. They only worked bronze and brass, and they had to import those metals. They didn't mine them in their own country. The Philistines had ironworking, and now an ox goad, you could make a brass or bronze ox goad, but essentially nobody did it. the point of an ox goad was to get the ox motivated, and an iron one just it worked better. But an ox goad was not viewed as a weapon. It was a small metal tip on a long wooden pole. Now, the end was pointed, but it wasn't a very strong thing. It was just, you weren't trying to damage your ox when you poked it, when you motivated it. You were trying to just teach it, okay, here, I'm going to poke you on the left, I want you to go right. I'm going to poke you on the right, I want you to go left. I'm going to poke you in the back, and I want you to go faster. That kind of thing. If the ox was ornery and decided not to do, you could poke it hard enough to injure it. But it was not in your economic interest to stab your ox. You didn't want to damage your ox. You really didn't want to make your ox mad at you. You just wanted to teach him that you were boss. And so, a 120-pound man could control a 800-pound ox or a 1,000-pound ox. And get it to plow for you or whatever. And so the ox goad was just an extension of your arm. And you barely pricked the ox. You didn't really want to draw blood. It did need to be sharp enough the ox didn't go, I don't care what you did. It's kind of like barbed wire. Barbed wire is not supposed to cut the cattle. Barbed wire is there to be uncomfortable, but not cause injury. Now, you can, a cow that's panicked can run into barbed wire hard enough to injure itself. But most cows don't come at the barbed wire that hard, and they learn, if I push too hard, if I try to get through this fence, it bites back. I don't do that. I respect the fence, and I don't push on the fence. And barbed wire is there just to teach the cow, here's the boundary. You want to reach through with your neck, do it carefully. You can eat the grass, you can reach, because somehow the psychology of a cow is the grass on the other side is greener. I've seen it here in Benbrook. There's what's called Smith Ranch. It's a working ranch here in Benbrook, and there's cows on it. And in the spring, the grass is growing, and you'll see cows standing at the fence, eating green grass on the other side, in grass that's taller on their side. I've seen it, but the cows also do so gingerly. That they're pressing against the barbed wire. They don't want to poke themselves, and it keeps them from going through the fence. I can tell you from walking Zeke around the fence, some of those fence posts looked like they were put in the ground before my grandfather was born. Even cedar posts eventually get pretty shaky. They're pretty flimsy. Cows have learned about barbed wire, and they're not testing that fence. If they really were concerted about it, they could probably break the fence post off, and once they started breaking fence post off, break it all down and escape there. But they don't, because they've learned that the barbed wire pokes, and so they don't test it. That is the purpose of a goad. It wasn't to injure the animal, it was to poke it enough that it learned, he can poke me and hurt. And, if I do it before he hurts, I just have a long wooden pole with a little piece of metal on the end, my left or my right or my back, and I can quickly learn to avoid pain. And, we get along with human that feeds us, and he doesn't have to poke me, and I do what he wants. That's the purpose of an ox goad. So an ox goad does not have to be real sharp. You wouldn't think it's a weapon. Shamgar was obviously a strong man to use a dull weapon to kill 600 men. He was also pretty bold if he killed 600 men. Hand-to-hand combat with improper weapon, you got to be bold. He's also probably pretty good at it. And so he gets to rule for a little while. 600 men, when the Israelites invaded, was actually a pretty good sized army. So it was a major chunk of the Philistine army. Now, by the time David comes around, 600 men was acceptable losses for a day on the battlefield. Land gets a lot more populated. But at this day and time, it's probably a major chunk of the Philistine army. And so the Philistines quit messing with Israel for a while. Because there's that crazy guy with the ox goad that is actually pretty good with an improvised weapon and kills people with it. I kind of suspect that he was strong enough man. The wooden part is a club was his main weapon, and ox goad could be up to 10 foot long. Most of them were 5 to 6, but even a 5 to 6 foot pole swung right could be a pretty devastating weapon, particularly if it's got a iron piece on the end that keeps the end from shattering, and the iron piece contacts you. Thrusting weapon, maybe not so valuable, but maybe could do enough damage, bruise you enough that you lost your ability to guard yourself, and then he could do the damage with the side of the ox goad as a club. Not sure how Shamgar did it. There's not a lot of lists. I mean, let's face it, it's one verse that lists what Shamgar did. But he killed 600 men with it. That's impressive. And the Philistines took note of it, and they left Israel alone. Chapter 4 starts with after Ehud died. So Ehud was a much more influential person than Shamgar, even though Shamgar was after him. We'll get to that somewhat next week. We'll pick up chapter 4 for next week. Some housekeeping things. I will be at church Wednesday for the Bible study. I will be there at 6. I will have to leave at 6:30, so we will have to get started quickly, deal with this quickly, and then leave. Y'all can stay around and talk. There will be choir at 7. Bill will be there. So I won't lock up the building or kick y'all out or anything. So I hope to see you there. But we'll have to pick up the pace and get through whatever questions you have, whatever comments you want to make, whatever insights you've had, and get back to, I've got to get back to Benbrook. The reason for that is, and most of y'all know, I volunteered in the fall last year to sit on the Parks and Recreation Board of the city of Benbrook. Theoretically, the 2-year term started in January. State law does say, though, to be sworn in, you have to have a physical meeting. And the city of Benbrook was not having physical meetings at the time. They said they would swear me in. The first meeting, they had a physical meeting. They had Zoom meetings all year so far. And tomorrow is the first in-person meeting. So they're going to swear me and other new members in. And we have some things to discuss. They're setting long-term policy for the City of Benbrook Parks Department about how to grow the parks and where to for the parks employees to negotiate and build and that kind of thing. And so I've had a bunch of material to read. We're going to be finalizing the plan, making sure it makes sense. Part of what I did this weekend, instead of record Bible study is I visited all the city parks in Benbrook, except the one that I live next door to. And I've been to it plenty enough that I basically compared the other parks to it mentally as I looked at them and evaluated them. I was pleasantly surprised by some of the parks I saw. We have some very nice parks here. But we also need to maintain them. And part of my job is to help set the policy of how to do that, how we need to use resources. Obviously, resources are not just infinite. So I've got to, and we have to finalize that plan. They've been working on it for a year and a half. I've had it for about a month and a half, working through the material. I like what I see. I think there's a lot of wisdom going on there, but need to go to the meeting, become a board member, and then put my insight into the idea. I saw things they had stated before and things the public had said, and I saw some things that they hadn't seen. I saw part of what they had seen, and I think we're all going to be on the same page, but I do need to be there. The official meeting starts at 7:30, but I need to be there at 7 o'clock for the preliminaries and make sure everything is looking good. So I got to leave the church at 6:30, so that's why I got to leave there then. I hope to see you there. If not, we'll see you here next week, hopefully earlier on the weekend than Tuesday evening, recording the Bible study, where we go into chapter 4, and we're going to deal with Deborah and what she meant to Israel and what she represents and why she's important. Gracious Lord, even when your people rebelled against you, you sent them saviors. You sent them people to rescue them from their enemies. You sent them people who were wise and cunning and knowledgeable about how to do things. Lord, you are still loving and patient and gracious to us, even when we have failed you, rebelled, done our own thing. Even if it wasn't an open rebellion, but one of just simply failing to think things through. Lord, you still draw us back to yourself. Thank you for being consistent at that. Lord, we are in the midst of a pandemic here. Pestilence is coming through the land, and it's again strengthening through the land. I think that's at your command, because we, as American people, have ignored you, flaunted your law, thought you weren't important, and thought we could do a better thing for ourselves. And Lord, it's destroying our land from the inside, and you're sending warning signs, as you said in 1 Chronicles 7. If famine comes to the land, or earthquake, or drought, or pestilence, or war, Lord, all those things have come through our land in the last 10 or 15 years. In fact, for the last 25 years, we've been constantly at war and had earthquakes and famines and rain and mudslides and disruptions to our food supply, and still yet we do not repent and turn to you. And now you've sent pestilence, and we're still obstinate. Lord, I ask that you send your Holy Spirit through this, that we, your people, would humble ourselves and pray and seek your face and turn from our wicked way to follow you again. And that as we do that, then you would send your Holy Spirit to the unsafe people around us, that we would see them also convicted of truth and righteousness and sin, and repent and turn to you. Lord, You are gracious, but you are also just. Please save us again. In your holy name, amen. Hope to see you Wednesday. If not, I'll see you back here.